The average person has about 4,000 weeks in their lifetime, and if you're 40, you've probably used about half of them. Now, that's not to scare you, but after helping thousands of New Zealanders plan how they'll eventually quit work for good, I've realised something. Many Kiwis are working too long, and that's why you need to know the 8 signs that you should retire earlier than you currently think. I'll start by looking at what these 8 signs are, and once you know who they apply to, by the end of this video, you'll finally know if you should quit your job early. Now, this book changed how I think about money and retirement, and if you've read The Psychology of Money, you might remember the story of a man named Ronald Reed. He lived in a small town in the United States, and he was the first person in his family to finish high school. But he never really had a flash job. He worked at a petrol station and fixed up cars for about 25 years. Then he swept floors at a big department store for another 17 years. But when this poor janitor eventually died, he shocked the world because he left over $8 million behind to the charities he cared about. But how did he do that? How does a cleaner end up a millionaire with more money than people with white-collar jobs like bankers, doctors, and lawyers? Well, it turned out there was no special trick. He just saved, he invested, and he kept holding on to those assets. Now compare that to Richard Fusco, who appears in the same book. Now, Richard's got a different story. He went to Harvard, a big posh American college, and he became a banker before retiring in his 40s. Now, you'd usually think that the investment banker would end up with way more money than old Ronald the janitor. But Richard the banker, he ended up bankrupt. And the number one difference between Ronald and Richard is that Ronald the janitor, he understood his money. He constantly made good financial decisions. And that's why sign number 1 that you can retire early is not whether you've got a fancy job or not. It's not whether you earn a lot of money or not. It's if you understand your money, because that will give you the chance to actually invest and then retire earlier. Sign number 2 is if you know how much you're really going to spend in retirement, because the issue I see with Kiwis is they think they're going to spend way more than they actually will. And what that means is they delay quitting their job because they're so worried about saving up more and more and more money, and they're scared that if they stop working, their money's going to eventually run out. So when people often start thinking about retiring, they think, well, I earn 100K a year, and so I need to find a way to spend 100K a year when I'm not working. But there are so many things you're not going to have to spend money on once you retire. First of all, if you earn 100K today, you don't get 100 grand in your bank account. You're probably paying about $25,000 a year in tax. Well, once you retire, you might not earn an income, and so you're not going to have to pay that tax anymore. For most Kiwis, your mortgage is also your biggest expense. If you're mortgage-free at retirement, well, you're not going to be paying your mortgage either. And you're likely not going to need to save money anymore for your retirement. You're already retired. Now, you don't have to pull out a spreadsheet and create a line-by-line budget to figure out what you're going to spend. You can get an estimate in just 2 minutes of what your retirement could cost using this calculator that I built for you guys. So if you earn 100 grand a year, you're contributing 4% to your KiwiSaver, which you're not going to be paying once you retire. You don't have a partner, and your mortgage payment is $600 a week, so $2,400 a month. Not spending anything on childcare, but you are saving $100 a week, so $400 a month. And you do want to spend 10 grand a year on travel once you retire. Well, your retirement lifestyle is expected to cost just under $49,000 a year. And I'll drop the link to this calculator down in the description so you can run this yourself. And if you do run this yourself, you might see that even if you earn 100K a year, your retirement lifestyle might only cost you 50 grand a year once you take some of those costs out. And if you find out you only need to spend half the amount in retirement that you think you're going to need, well, that means you might only need half the amount saved by the time you retire, and that means you might be able to retire way earlier. The third sign is if you actually know how much you need to retire. And this is another reason I see Kiwis wait way too long to retire or slow down working, which is they get so worried about running out of money that they work too long and they don't get a chance to enjoy their money. So what you've got to do is really figure out, well, how much money do I need invested or saved in the bank or equity in property so that you have the confidence to quit work for good. Now, these numbers used to be really hard to calculate and quite mathematical, and that is the reason why I hired this man, who is the #1 Excel champion in New Zealand and top 10 in the world, to build a spreadsheet that tells you how much money you might need. So let's say we've got this couple, Ollie and Lauren. He's 42, she's 40 years old, and they want to retire when Ollie is 65 and Lauren would then be 63. And they want to spend 80 grand a year because they use that calculator I showed you before and they figured out 80 grand's the number for them. Now, they are investing at the moment. They both earned 80 grand each and they are investing in Kiwis. And then on top of that, they own an investment property. It's $400,000 and the mortgage is also $400K at the moment. Now, if they ran their numbers, it is likely that they are going to have enough money to last them until Ollie is 92 and beyond, and they could continue living that lifestyle that they want well into their 90s. And that's why these numbers are really powerful, because once you create a forecast of how much money you might have in the future, that gives you the confidence to quit work for good and maybe quit work earlier and know, or at least have the confidence that you're probably not going to run out of money. And if you want to get access to this kind of number crunching and find out what these numbers look like for you, you need to book a free meeting with one of my financial advisors at Opus Partners, because after just an hour, you're going to walk away knowing how much money you're going to need to have saved for retirement and so you can retire the way you want. And if that sounds good and you want to book, just click the link down in the description to book that free meeting. Now, I learned sign number 4 that you should retire earlier than you think in the strangest way. I was lying on a bed in a hotel room when I opened up the New Zealand Herald app and I started reading an article by New Zealand's most trusted financial journalist, Mary Holm. And my eyes went really wide because when I was reading this article, I realized she was talking about me and my number crunching. And she said that my estimates for how much you need to retire comfortably were a little on the high side. Now, I don't agree with everything Mary wrote, but one point that she made is that if you retire at 65 and say you want to spend 60 grand a year, you're not necessarily going to spend that 60 grand every single year for the rest of your life, because as you get older, you get to spend less. So think about it. In your early 60s, if you're retired, you might be off to Europe taking big overseas trips and ticking things off your bucket list. But by your mid-70s, you're probably not backpacking through South America. You might slow down. You're going to travel less. After all those long flights, they start to become harder on old bodies, and your social circle is likely to shrink, and you're just going to go out less. So your day-to-day life will become simpler when you're in your 80s compared to when you're in your 60s. And that is the reason why the New Zealand Society of Actuaries, who are basically the proper number nerds, say that retirees buy about 2% less stuff each year. And what that means is that as the cost of living rises, your spending might not necessarily keep up with that. Effectively, if you're going to buy less stuff over time, that means you don't need to have as much money saved in your bank or invested at the point when you retire today. So if they decided that their income isn't going to keep up with inflation from the age of 70, and they started investing $200 a week into index funds, then they would likely be able to retire at 59 and probably not run out of money. And the reason behind that is they could start living off their KiwiSaver when it becomes available. They'd have some money in index funds. They'd be able to save that for a while, and also this equity in property. And the money would likely last them until they're 92 years old. Now, there is one more big piece to the puzzle, that you might already have enough money to retire, but you could be invested in the wrong assets, and that's where sign number 5 comes in, which is that you're equity rich but cash flow poor. And I really became aware of this when I was speaking at a property investment event in New Plymouth. This lady came up to me at the end and said, "Ed, I really want to retire. I own 6 investment properties, but I just can't figure out how to do it." Now, it turns out that her investment properties were worth $5 million all up, and she had about $2 million worth of mortgages. And what that meant is that she's got $3 million of equity or wealth within these houses, which is a lot of money, right? And so I said to her, okay, well, how much income, how much cash flow are you getting from these properties once you take the rent and pay all the costs? Her answer shocked me. It was $0, nothing from these properties. Now, this investor had done the hard part. She'd invested over the decades, but those properties that made her wealthy were now holding her back. Because if she sold those houses, paid off the debt, she could probably make about $120 grand just in rental income after paying all her costs if she bought some higher yielding properties. And that would mean that she was able to get way more than the 70 grand a year that she said she actually wanted to live off and spend. So she had the money, she had the wealth, but it just looked like it was invested in the wrong assets. And that's why sign number 5, that you could potentially retire way earlier than you think, is if you are equity rich but cash flow poor. And if that is you, it's really important that you don't talk to an economist like me, and instead you talk to a financial advisor who can help you choose the right investments for your situation. And look, if you're enjoying this video, do me a quick favor and hit the like button, because that's how I know which videos I should do more of or not. And honestly, it helps with the YouTube algorithm. Subscribing, that helps too, and that means you're gonna automatically get more videos like this about investing in New Zealand. Now, if you do already subscribe, I think we know each other well enough where I can ask you a pretty brutal question, which is, how do you feel about your job? Do you love it? Is it just okay? Or do you really, really hate it? And when I say hate it, I'm not talking about a bad Tuesday when your boss has pissed you off. I'm talking about that deep, dragging feeling that's been there for months, maybe even years. Now, if that is you, you're not alone. This study found that over 1 in 10 people are really unhappy in their job. And if that is you, that is a sign that you should retire earlier than you think you should, or at least make some big changes. Because what happens if you retire at 65, the unofficial retirement age in New Zealand? Well, you might start having more health issues from 70 to 80. Maybe you're juggling more doctor's appointments, more pills, more just keeping things ticking over. And by your mid-80s, statistically, you're dead. So if you spend most of your time, most of what could be your really good retirement years, going to a job that you just can't stand, counting down the minutes till you can go home on a Friday afternoon, you could be burning through your best retirement years, spending your time doing something you already know that you hate. Now, I'm not saying that if you had a rough week, you could quit your job, or you should quit your job and move to Bali, but it is a sign that maybe you should retire earlier, or at least change something. Now, here's the catch. While some people can't stand doing their job for another 20 years, some people literally can't. And that's why sign number 7 that you should retire earlier is if you've got a really physical job. Now, if I think about both my brothers, they're both tradies. One's a plumber, the other's an electrician. And they've got good incomes, but now they're hitting 40 years old. And I know that Sam is finding it harder to crawl under the house to fix the pipes underneath them. And there are researchers who found that almost 6 in 10 tradies have muscle or joint problems. And if you're over the age of 40, those rates of work-related problems are even higher. And so if you do work a physical job rather than in an office, you do have to ask yourself if you even can keep working until you're 65, and whether maybe you should retire earlier than the standard 65 that everyone thinks. The last sign might be the most important one. You see, when I ask people what they want to do when they retire, they often don't say things like they want to spend the next 30 years playing golf or doing the crossword puzzle. Often they say that they like working, but they just want the freedom to work a little less and maybe enjoy life a little more. So you might start thinking things like, I'd just love to work 2 days a week, or I'd like to stay in my job, but only if I could work from the bench. And if that's running through your mind, that's a sign that maybe you should retire earlier than you think. Because if you could make half the income you do now, then your savings and investments only have to pay for the other half of your spending, which means that your savings should last at least twice as long, so you can retire that much earlier. Now, let's say you need to spend about 70 grand a year to live your life, and you want to retire at 55. Well, if you want that to come entirely from your investments, you need a pretty chunky nest egg. But now imagine you still work 2 to 3 days a week and bring in 30K a year just from part-time work. Well, all of a sudden, your investments only need to cover 40 grand a year, so you don't need as much saved. And if you could figure out if this was a possibility for you, what would that mean? Well, maybe you could avoid being one of those people who work too long and don't enjoy life as much as they could. But how do you figure out if that's even a possibility? Well, that's why I have a team of over 12 financial advisors who help people figure out when they can actually retire and run these kinds of numbers for people like you so you can figure out if it's even possible. And if you do book a free meeting, after just an hour, you'll walk away knowing how much money you'd need to have saved to retire the way that you want. Now, if that sounds good, click the link down in the description to book your free meeting, because think about that janitor we discussed earlier, Ronald Reed. In many ways, he is an absolute success. But one of my friends always says a wooden overcoat has no pockets. In other words, you can't take money with you when you eventually go. And so you might as well use the money you have so you don't work too long. And even if you're like Ronald and plan to give all of your money away, if you know how long your money can last, then maybe you've got the confidence to give it away during your lifetime so you can at least see the benefit of your life's work. And if you're ready to go one step further and actually build the wealth to support that earlier retirement, then you've got to watch this next video, which is the 5 ways to retire filthy rich in New Zealand. Because in this video, we break down why just 2 investment properties could be enough for a very comfortable retirement, and which strategies actually work and the ones that don't really. Click the video and I'll see you there.